Hey, writer, are you ready to master show don't tell in your romance writing? Whether you're writing romance, memoir, or you're writing fiction in some other genre, join me and other top writing experts at this year's Writing Romance Mastery Summit, which runs January 27th to 31st, 2025. At the summit, you're going to be online and getting actionable tips to captivate readers, bring your stories to life. And best of all, it's free for a limited time just because you are part of this community. Register now at suzyvidori.com/romance and get ready to craft your swoon worthy story. Welcome to Show Don't Tell Writing with me, Suzy Vidori, where I teach you the tried and true secrets to writing fiction, nonfiction that are going to wow your readers, broken down step by step. We're going to explore writing techniques. I'm going to show you a glimpse behind the scenes of successful writers' careers that you wouldn't have access to otherwise. And I'm also going to coach writers live on their pages so that you can learn and transform your own storytelling. Whether you're just starting out, you're drafting your first book, you're editing, or you're currently rewriting that book, or maybe even your 10th book, this show's going to help you unlock the writing skills that you didn't even know you needed, but you definitely do. I'm so looking forward to helping you get your amazing ideas from your mind onto your pages in an exciting way for both you and your readers so that you can achieve your wildest writing dreams. And you're going to also have some fun doing it. Let's dive in. Today, I am thrilled to have with me Liisa Kovala. She is a Finnish Canadian author, a colleague of mine as a fellow Author Accelerator certified book coach, and she's also a former high school English teacher. Today, I'm super excited to talk with Liisa about her journey and her books, but also what she's seeing as she collates stories of women writers in her podcast, Women Writing. What are our unique challenges and opportunities as women when we're young, when we're middle aged and aging? Lisa and I are going to have a frank discussion about the ups and downs that you're not going to want to miss. She is the author of Surviving Struthof, My Father's Memories Behind the Death Gate, which is a family memoir published by Latitude 46 in 2017. Lisa actually first self published that book and later got it picked up by traditional publishing, which is the holy grail and not very common. She's going to talk a little bit about that. And her debut novel came out in 2022, which is Sissu's Winter War, which Sissu is a concept, which is a Finnish word that means grit and determination, and something that Lisa teaches, and we talk about that as well in this episode. She also writes short stories and creative nonfiction and has been published in a variety of anthologies and literary magazines. She hosts writers' retreats. She can be found on Substack, and she also has her podcast. So go check out Women Writing Podcast. The link to that is in the show notes. She is the perfect combo of tough love, compassion, and proven strategies when coaching writers, serving women who want to write a novel or memoir but are struggling with finding time and the energy to do it all by themselves. She's a huge advocate for finding joy in writing and filling your creative well so that you can serve others. All right. Oh, welcome, Lisa. I am so excited to finally have you on the Show Don't Tell Writing podcast.
Thanks, Suzy. I'm so delighted to be here.
Yeah, I mean, we've been talking for a while now because you have just launched your podcast, which is all about women in writing. And I'm just so intrigued by that topic. I'm like, Lisa, please come on, talk about women writing. I have a lot of women in my audience, but I think even for men, it's pretty interesting to know
Sure.
what compelled you to launch a podcast and to start a whole platform on the topic of women. What was it? What's going
Yeah,
on?
for sure. Well, I don't know exactly why I decided to do that, but I am the youngest of four kids and I'm the only girl. So I've been surrounded by men growing up. And maybe I really longed for a sister. I don't know. This is getting to the psychological background, but I think,
That's what we're doing in Show Don't
yeah,
Tell is
that's right.
kind of like
A
we
little
peel
therapy
back the
session.
layers and we show them. Yeah, we show them
That's right.
behind the scenes. It's all right.
Exactly. But I think really I was interested in how women's experiences are actually different, I think, from men's experiences. And a lot of the advice I received as sort of a younger person and as a writer when I was studying were often, kind of dead white guys who said certain things. And I thought that doesn't work for me. And it made me feel bad about myself. Like things like write every day. It just didn't fit into my life as a young person, as a mom, as a full-time teacher. Those things just didn't happen. And then I just thought, well, I'm not a real writer because I'm not writing every day. So
Oh, right
it's,
every day. Yeah, right every
yeah,
day is one of those things, and you'll hear me say it again and again and again. I mean, it's great advice while it works for you. And what I find is writers who come to me who've taken that advice and are so proud. They've done it for a year, they've done it for 2 years, and then one day they can't, women
yes,
or men. One day
yes,
they can't, and they feel terrible about it, and they never go back to it, and they feel like a failure. And I
right.
just think, I mean, get some writing habits. That's my
Hmm.
best advice. Like, get some
Agreed.
habits, whatever those are. But yeah, we're going to talk a
Yeah,
little bit about the differences between women and men and how we fit it into our lives and how we
yeah,
view it. But definitely,
absolutely.
yeah, that one
But
I
women
just
writing, the
bad
podcast
advice.
came out of the newsletter. So I started the newsletter maybe a year, maybe almost a year and a half ago. And I just wanted to feature women who were doing the work of writing and who were, putting themselves out there either as self-published or traditionally published writers to give other women support and encouragement and advice and all of those things. And so I'd been doing that for a year and a half. And, every week I looked forward to reading and editing these pieces because I learn so much every time, right? Somebody has something that resonates with me, something else, maybe not as much, and some other reader will, it'll resonate for them. So the podcast sort of came out of that newsletter. And then I also wanted to speak to industry professionals who could give us some more background information that will help us in this sort of writing endeavor because it's, such a learning curve. And we're all at different stages of that process. And so if I can encourage some women to just keep doing it, great. That would be wonderful.
Oh, amazing. I love that. I love that goal. What did you find? So you've had the chance, you've been doing this a while. You've had the chance to interview some of your idols. I mean, that's why I do a lot of things. That's why I'm having you on here, right? Like I can learn. So what is it that you've noticed in terms of a trend? Are there sort of patterns that you see when you talk to
Mhm.
women about what it's like to be a writer? Like give us
Yeah.
some insight.
Yeah, so one of the first questions I ask is just about when and where women write. So I'm sort of interested in the spaces we have. I have this office area where I have a computer and I have a desk and I'm kind of fortunate to have this space that I really enjoy. But I don't even write here a lot. Like I'll do other kinds of work here. I'll have client meetings or I will do editing here. But when I'm writing, I kind of want to be on a couch or in this comfy chair or some other space that feels really cozy. And I'm noticing that that's really true of most of the writers who respond about these spaces. There's this aspiration to have the perfect office space. And that somehow that's like that would be magic and then I could write. But the truth is people who have those perfect beautiful lovely spaces often don't even use them. They're somewhere else,
Yeah,
in a
right?
comfy chair somewhere. And so it's just interesting, or even the kinds of work they do happens in different places. So, like I say, I'll edit here, but I will proofread elsewhere. I will write fresh pages somewhere else. And so it's just finding those comfort zones, those places where certain kinds of work and your brain kind of works with that environment. I think that's kind of important, not to feel like, oh, if I had this kind of space, then I'll be a writer, then I'll get the
Yeah,
pages
and I
done.
think it's not unlike, when I first started working from home, and it was long before the pandemic, but or people that I know that started working from home in a day job during the pandemic that say, "Oh my gosh, it's really hard to get work done because I know there's laundry and there's
Yeah.
dishes and there's all the things." It's
Yeah.
kind of like that for me now as well when I have a workspace where I have to edit other people's work, right? And I
Yes.
have emails to respond to and a
Yeah.
podcast to produce and all those other parts of my job. And writing is arguably the most amazing part of our jobs,
Right.
right? And
Exactly.
it feels like a luxury.
Yeah.
And so I have to almost leave there. I actually write fresh pages at a coffee shop
Yeah.
or a bar, a noisy
Yes.
space, which is
Yeah.
crazy. And then
No.
somehow the editing feels more like work. And so I can
Yes.
do that back at my workspace.
Yeah.
I've
It's interesting. A lot
I've
of
been
women
having
like that coffee shop environment. that kind of being able to tune out the background sounds. And for me, often leaving the house to go there, that's the only reason I'm going. That and maybe coffee or a
Yes.
chai latte, right? Like
Yeah.
that's all I'm doing there. I'm not doing any other kind of work. So you kind of flip your brain to say, this is why I'm here. I was speaking to a writer yesterday and he said he will put on coffee shop sounds in his office to get the ambiance of it so that he feels like in that kind of zone, in that headspace, which I thought was really interesting.
It's amazing. Yeah, because I don't listen to music ever when I used to somehow, I don't know how I did this. I used to somehow watch television and write.
Oh,
Or like
yeah.
when I was working full time and I'd be tired and I'd kind of have my laptop open while I'm watching my favorite shows. I don't do that anymore because I take it much more seriously. And I think it just introduces way too many errors.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
But
yeah,
if you
oh,
can
that's
tune it
amazing.
out, maybe it's just the background noise. And if you can tune it out, then maybe that's okay. Especially maybe on an early draft. Later, you probably don't want to do that as much. But yeah, I see what you're saying. I can watch TV if I'm doing something that's a little bit more mindless, like creating things on Canva, just something creative, but not too stressful. I can have the TV on in the background. That works for me.
Yeah, absolutely. I love television, by the way. People ask me what my hobbies are, and I'm like embarrassed to say that watching television. I mean, I'm somebody who consumes
It's
story in
yeah,
every
it's
format, right?
story.
Like I'm obsessed with story,
I agree.
and I will binge watch things, and it's not like a mindless thing for me. I'm like parsing it through
Yes.
and
Yes.
evaluating it, and I think it actually helps my
Criticizing the
job.
dialogue. Do you do that, Susie? I say,
Oh my
oh no, don't
gosh.
say that.
Yeah, I actually did a recent episode on dialogue and I have an article coming out about it. So I've been thinking about a lot how I give advice on dialogue, and I'm noticing that when I watch television shows, it's different than in a book. And so just noticing how that's different and how the
Yeah.
advice that I'm giving, and people are so influenced by television, we don't realize that some of that doesn't work in a book,
Yeah.
right?
No. No.
So before we hit record here, we were talking a little bit about age because I shared with you that I was going to hit my 50th episode. This is the first time I'm going to be announcing it publicly when I turned 50 this year. Actually, the week to the
Yay.
day. And it wasn't on purpose, but we're going to do it and celebrate 50.
Amazing.
And, like what age of women are you finding are wanting to talk about this writing business, right? Like I
Yeah.
like to think people think I'm younger. I work with a lot of women in middle age, right? Like
Mhm.
who are just kind of figuring this thing out. What does that mean what does age mean to you?
Yeah. So, a couple things about that. One is the women I'm seeing are often sort of mid career and later, or have left their careers or retired. And they're coming
Mhm.
into it at various times. But so many of them have already, been in love with writing since they were children, as many of us were. Right. And they've delayed and delayed and delayed. And then it's like, okay, when am I going to start this? And so for me, turning like my mom, who's now 91, I'm 53, she's 91 said to me, well, she said, when she turned 50, it was like this big moment for her. Like she just felt like, oh, now I'm an adult. Now I get to decide what I'm going to do. And I thought, you waited till you were 50 to feel that. And
Oh
I had that
goodness.
I know, right? And I had that very similar experience at 40. And I thought, oh, this is what she's talking about. 40 was just this moment in my life where I thought, I feel like a grown up. Like I feel like I don't really have to do what everyone else tells me. And then when I turned 50, I had a very similar experience and it's just the best time of my life. Really, really is. I just feel like we have experience and knowledge and we know our boundaries and we want to pursue those creative things and our writing or art or whatever it is. And we carve time out for ourselves in a way that when you're maybe in your 20s you're focused on school or getting that first job. In your 30s you might have kids or a family or pursuing your career or whatever it is. It seems like everything is for everybody else. And this time in my life, I'm like, okay, you know what? I'm gonna do what I want to do now. And I don't have the same guilt I had when I carved out time when I was younger and my kids were younger. I always felt like there was a little bit of tension between my choices, right? I was always disappointing someone, whether it was myself or
Oh,
somebody
real,
else.
yeah, and real or imagined, right?
Yes.
Like real or imagined. So it's, doesn't necessarily mean I don't know your situation, but in my situation, I've got a super supportive family, and
Yes.
yet making those choices for yourself
Yeah.
feels like somehow, yeah, wrong or selfish.
Absolutely. That is one of the pieces of advice that a lot of the women in women writing have said is that, and these are often coming from writers who have, they're maybe 40, 50, 60 years old, and they're saying you have to just do it. You have to take that time for yourself, put yourself on the schedule, and not feel like everything is for everybody else. And I totally agree with that because when you give yourself that time, you have more energy for everyone else. And we forget that, right? If we're giving, giving, giving all the time, we get depleted. But if we take that time for ourselves to do the things we love, then we have more to give. Like it sounds counterintuitive, but I think it really is true.
Oh, I think that's absolutely true. I mean, I went through something similar for me. That 40 was that light bulb, and I've never really framed it this way before, but just listening to you talk, for me, I was at the top of my career. I was an executive, a chief operating officer. I was traveling around the world. But I always thought, I kind of had this 40 under 40 mentality, or by the time I'm 40, I will have done these things. And on that bucket list was write a book. And I had a draft, and I had a draft. It took me quite a long time to find a publisher, but I hadn't found a publisher when I was 40. And it was kind of like this wah wah moment, right? Where I just was like, all right, I didn't do it, right? And I know my list is longer than people's lists are in their entire lifetime, but it didn't feel great. And so I
Mm.
had a huge party. I was excited to launch my book that year, and I wasn't sure what was going to happen. But instead, I had a giant 40th birthday party and just celebrated anyway. And yeah, I just went, yeah, this is my time. And you know what? I did find a publisher that year. I did find a publisher. I did have that big book launch. And I did not have any idea that a decade later I'd be doing this full
Yeah.
time. That was not even on my radar, right? Like you talk
Amazing.
about something for yourself and thinking that it will just be sort of a side gig, right?
Mhm.
Or this hobby, and then it kind of just took over my life and became who I was. I don't know
Yeah.
if that resonates with you.
Absolutely. You
Um,
you really start to follow your joy. When I was 50, I mean, I've been speaking to my husband for a couple years before I turned 50 that I thought I might want to take early retirement from teaching. And then COVID hit, and that was not a great time for teachers. And then
yeah.
we started to recover from COVID, and I was turning 50 in 2022. And we were just on a walk one day, and I said, I was probably complaining about something or other. And he says, I think you're done. And I said, I think I'm done too. I had my resignation in the next day and I finished the school year 6 weeks and I was done. So I did it just in a
Wow.
moment,
It
like I
happened
turned
that fast
50.
and you didn't even know, right? It,
No,
it
it's just
just
it's
snuck
just a
up on
life,
you.
yeah, life-changing moment, a decision. And I don't know how, if you're the same or if anyone else is the same, but when I make the right decision, I feel it in my body, right? Like I just feel it. If I'm making the wrong decision, my body is kind of, it's not right. Like I can tell things aren't quite right. And I didn't know what I was going to do next. I knew I would write, but I didn't even know about book coaching until, probably 6 months later, I came across Jenny Nash's Author Accelerator. So, you just kind of have to pay attention to the signals and kind of say, okay, well, you know, life is short and what else do I want to do? And a lot of people just feel like they have to stay in unhappy situations for a long time because, oh, pension or whatever the reason. Everyone has a reason for staying in the same place, but I don't know. I think life is really short and we have to take risks
Yeah,
sometimes.
and
It pays off.
congratulations. And it is a risk, right? Like it's not, and it depends on your circumstance. Not everybody can take that risk at
It's
that
true.
moment, but that's amazing that you were able to make that decision. But what skills, because I work with a lot of writers that come
Mhm.
from other backgrounds, and I love, love, love working with writers who've come from other careers. And they think it's like a detriment. Oh my gosh, like I'm not a writer. Like, who am I to come into
Right.
here? And that's not the way that I see it because everybody brings skills from somewhere else. And the beauty
Yes.
of being a writer is you can come from anywhere. You still need to learn how to write and learn
Yes.
the skills, but for you, what did you find that being a teacher has brought to your writing career?
Well, yes. And I mean, at the beginning, I probably didn't quite make the connection, but now I look back and I think, oh, all of those things have really helped me inadvertently. Like those are skills that I'm using all the time now. And I'm always encouraging teachers because I know there's a lot of them who want to write a book. I'm not suggesting it's the excuses as in a negative way, but we all have that, right? We say, well, I don't have time and family. We have all the reasons why we can't. And my suggestion is there's so many reasons why you can, whether you're a teacher or in a different profession, there's ways to carve out little moments in your day. Like I remember, well, as a teacher, this is a tip for teachers. I was an English teacher, so that's also useful. But I would give my kids time, 10 to 15 minutes a day to do a quick write, which meant that they were writing and I would write too. Sometimes I'd write the quick write, sometimes I'd write on my novel. And they sort of clued into the fact that I was working not on the quick write because they'd say, well, can you read it? And I'd say, well, I was actually working on my novel. And they really wanted to know about that, right? So there was this really interesting back and forth about that. But there are moments in your day, stay a little later after work, spend 20 minutes, lunchtime, write. Find those little nuggets of time. You don't need to have 3 hours in a day or write every day from 9 till noon or whatever it is. You need 10, 15, 20 minutes here and there and just go at it and get words on pages. And all of a
Yeah,
sudden
and
it's you have something, you know?
exactly. And I think when you're trying to fit that in, remember, give yourself credit for everything, not just words on page. But yes, words on page are
Yes.
important. But even, that write every day advice that we talked about at the beginning of this, it's like maybe not write every day, but think about it every day. Stay
Yeah.
close to it. Daydream something. I like to say, if you're not up for writing, don't stare at a blank page. Go for a walk and take one of your characters with you and think about it. Like
Yes.
all that stuff has to get done,
Yes.
not just the writing piece.
Right.
So, what is it that
Absolutely.
you can do? Yeah.
Yeah, and the other thing that a lot of professionals have with them is that organizational skills and research skills and project management skills all needed to write a book, right? If you're task oriented, I tend to be very task oriented, so I make myself little checklists and spreadsheets. And that's really useful when it comes to a big project like this that you know is a multi-year project. Very few people write a book in, a couple of months. Some people do, maybe if they're writing genre fiction, but most people spend a lot more time doing it, and you have to sustain that. And often, your job or your career, you have those skills that you can bring to the table, and that will help you get through the project and find joy in it, right?
Yeah. I mean, I love to say that nobody ever told me that writing could be a job. And so I
Right.
went and worked in banking and manufacturing for 20 years and did all this other stuff and then found my way back. But I don't know that had I become a writer right out of high school or out of university or out of college, I wouldn't have the same career. I wouldn't have the same experiences. I certainly wouldn't build it this way because I'm bringing with me so many different experiences. So whatever it is that people's jobs are, especially women, we can multitask, right? We can
Yeah,
bring all of those other things and maybe reinvent themselves.
absolutely.
Awesome. So you first wrote a memoir and it was Surviving, I'm going to say that I'm going to try it, Studhoff, My Father's Memories Beyond the Death Gate. And that was in 2017. So you were still working as a teacher at that time, right?
Yeah, I was working as a teacher. Well, when I started, it was 2012. So I had a 12-year-old and a 9-year-old, and I was working full time as a teacher and I was coaching. And I think I might have just finished a master's degree. And I was just one of those people who I think, like you, Susie, a lot of things happening at one time. I like
Yeah.
to be
I love how
busy.
you just like sort of casually say, "Oh, I might have just finished a master's."
Yeah, I think I just finished it like the
Oh
year
yeah.
before, maybe, or maybe that year. I can't remember. And, so I'm a person that keeps busy, but I got a phone call from my mom and she said, yeah, somebody wants to write about your dad. They want to write a book about your dad. And she said, I told them you're going to do that. I'm like, oh, okay. And in fact, I had wanted to do that since I was probably in grade 10 when we were having grade 10 history talking about World War II. So my dad was a Finnish merchant marine sailor and he was captured in Danzig in 1944 on the Vapu, which is a Finnish merchant marine ship, and all the sailors were sent to Stutthof concentration camp. And he was 16. So he, at 84 years old, decided that he was ready and willing to tell me his story. And so I'm like, okay, it's it's time. And of course, you can't delay now. He's 84. His health was not great, but it was okay at the time. And I started taking courses at University of Toronto's continuing studies, certificate of creative writing. And I thought I have to learn everything I can because if I want to write this book, like it needs to be well done. It's for my dad, right? And
Right.
so I just started interviewing him every Sunday for months and months about his memories. And he told me all about his childhood. He told me all about the Winter War when he was a young child. And then he told me all about coming to Canada. And I thought, oh, he's never going to go inside that concentration camp. We're not going to go there. And of course, my wise mother said, just be patient, just be patient. And I kept coming back week after week. And eventually one Sunday, he just, opened the death gate and let me in and shared all those memories with me. And so that was the journey we took together. And I started writing his story, and he read every single draft. The first one was so terrible. I didn't know how to write a scene. I mean, I could read a scene and know what was going on in the scene, but to write one, like I had to learn all those skills. And he read every single draft and rubber stamped everything, right? Like just I would change anything he didn't think was representative of what was happening. And it was just the best experience and made us so close. And then after it was published, I self-published it originally actually. And then it was picked up by the publisher and it was published under a different title. And he came to events with and sat and chatted with people and could talk about his experiences with strangers in a way that a year
Wow.
earlier, a couple of years earlier, he was struggling to tell me what it had been like. So it was a real transformation in his life as well. And I hesitate to call writing and recalling these things therapy, but I think to some extent it was therapeutic.
Yeah, I mean, writing is always personal, right?
Yeah,
Writing is always personal. And what a lovely thing to have shared with your dad, right?
absolutely.
And okay, so ironically, I don't know if you're going to feel called out here, but ironically, you now run a community for women writing, and you wrote from the male perspective. How was
Yeah, I
that?
did.
How was that?
Well, the decision early on, because this book falls in a weird category because it's not really memoir, because it's not my
Right.
story and it's his. It's creative nonfiction. It falls under that broader
Or
category.
his, yeah,
But there's no real category for story written by somebody else. Like it's not biography, you know what I mean? So
yeah,
I've seen the title family memoir a couple times and I thought, okay, but I mean, that's not really common. So it has no real category. And I think we need one because people are doing this. They're writing their family member
they are,
stories.
yeah.
And so I had to make a decision. I could write it in first person as though it was his voice. And I felt extremely uncomfortable doing that. Like I just like, it's not me. And so I knew I wanted to do third person and I did, but I knew I needed to do it from his perspective. So close third from his perspective. So that worked for me because I just felt uncomfortable doing a first person, I.
Yeah. And so
So
for
that
those of
worked.
us, yeah, for those of us who, don't speak point of view really easily, close third just means that it's like his name and, he did this, not I did this.
Mhm.
But we could still hear his thoughts and feel what's going on inside his body. And that's a
Yeah,
really common, it's a really powerful perspective. And it's
it is.
almost the same as doing first person.
Yeah. And I think that's why I chose it because it felt personal. It felt like everything is through his eyes. But as a writer with a first venture, and it's not my words and it's not my story, I just wanted that one step removal. And I think
Yeah.
that worked pretty well. So, yeah, writing from his perspective, you know, I did worry about getting things right. I did a ton of research. I probably researched for, I don't know, a year beforehand. I read every memoir I could find. I read all about the concentration camps. I did all of that. It was like putting on armor, like just I needed to know what was the possibilities of what could have happened to him before he told me because I'm a fairly sensitive person and I was worried that he would tell me stories and I would cry and that would be the end of it. And
He
go
wouldn't be able to open up.
that I
Yeah.
wouldn't be able to handle it. And he knew me. He knew. So I think perhaps one of the reasons he took so long to get to the concentration camp portions is because he was building himself up there to it, but also he was gauging my ability to handle it. Do you know what I mean?
Wow.
Like he was sensitive
Yeah,
to me.
definitely.
So that was part of it. And so I remember having moments where I was so concerned that I was not getting it right. And I remember I was working with Alison Latta at University of Toronto, and I was at work one day, and I had probably written something to her, a little note, and I must have sounded a little bit worried, concerned, because she calls me at work to kind of walk me off the ledge. Because and what she said to me, I remember always, is that you're writing the emotional truth of the story. So that's the important
Yeah.
part. You may not get that detail exactly right, but that doesn't matter. You're trying to capture the emotional truth. And it was like, okay, I can do that. I can do that. And so the fact that I was writing from his perspective and he was a male, it never really came into my thought process at the time because I was so keen on getting the story right as much as I could and getting the emotional truth of the story. And it's a journey. So whether you're writing women or men or whoever you're writing, it's you want to be as authentic as you possibly can.
Yeah, and you've got the most important sensitivity reader right there when
Yes.
your dad, he was reading
Yes.
it with you and
Yes.
and correcting or suggesting along the way. And so yeah, I love that, the emotional
Yeah.
truth. And that's a concept actually that is also talked about when you have parents with dementia, that the
Yes.
emotional truth is what matters, right? So that's
Yes.
interesting that they were using it there. But thank you
Yeah.
so much for sharing that piece of your journey because I think I work with a lot of memoir writers, and sometimes they get sort of partway through and they wonder, should I even tell this story? Like, is anybody going to care? Or do I want this for me? And did you ever have that moment where you were like, whew, this is a lot.
Yeah.
Should I, not can I do this, but should
Yeah.
I do this?
So well, I think what it was a little bit different for me because I felt like if he doesn't tell us these stories and I don't write them down, they are gone. And my brothers and I had often, chatted about it, and we all knew snippets, but we didn't understand the whole story, and none of us really knew what happened. And so the next generation certainly wouldn't know what happened. So I felt an obligation to write the stories down. But the whole intention originally was to write it and perhaps photocopy it for family members, maybe go to Staples and, bind it. We might bind it so that it at least looks nice.
Ambitious,
Right?
ambitious, right?
I know. We were gonna like make several copies. And so that was kind of my headspace. But being who I am, like I was wanting to write it I wanted to learn about writing, and I've always wanted to be a writer, and this was kind of the beginning of that journey in some ways. So, I wanted to be the best it could be, even if it was only for like, six people. Like that was
Well, and
fine.
I think that's something that, whether that's a female trait or not, I don't know, but it's something that we kind of couch our dreams, right?
Yeah,
So,
that's true.
even if Lisa's like so ambitious and in your deepest heart hopes that it would go on and by the way get shortlisted for a Northern Lit Award and it's also published in Finnish in Finland, like all of these things that might happen are your wildest dreams. And yet we tell ourselves this smaller thing like, oh, we might go to Staples and bind
Yes.
it for family members. And that's what initially writers will often say when they're writing memoir. Well, I don't care because I'm just going to do it for
Yes.
myself or my
Yes.
family. But really, you have this other dream. And thank you
Yes.
for not squashing that other dream and for actually realizing that that's a possibility. Because if you
Mhm.
hadn't listened to that inner dream or that
Yeah,
secret dream,
that's true.
you would probably not be here, right? We
Yeah.
wouldn't be
No,
talking about
it's
it.
true. We wouldn't be talking about it. And I think the thing that we realized too is when we started talking about the fact that we were working on this project, there was so much interest in it from family, of course, and from friends, of course, but people that, like got wind of this project. So you start to realize there are people out there that yearn for these kinds of stories. So whether you're writing a memoir or whatever you're writing, there's an audience out there who wants to hear about your experiences because it resonates with them. And we forget that, right? That it's like it seems so personal, but no, there are other people that need to hear that story too, and you'll help them in lots of ways. So I've had readers from all over the world contact me and tell me about their family members and their grandfather or their father or whatever, and they need these stories because they don't have those stories from their parents or grandparents, and they're gone. And those, it's kind of filling in a little gap for them too. So,
Yeah.
it goes beyond it's I think we need to allow ourselves to dream bigger, but I think maybe those smaller steps let us get there, right? Okay, I'm just going to finish it first. Okay, now I'm going to this. Okay. But know that there's that bigger dream and it is possible. You just need to keep working towards that goal, and you can make it happen. You can absolutely make it happen.
Is there a moment that you could pinpoint or a period of time when that changed from I'm gonna I'm gonna go to Staples and
Yeah.
Kinko's or whatever and photocopy it to
Yeah.
okay, I'm gonna do something wider with this. What
Yeah.
how did
I
you
can't
overcome that?
Well, I can't remember exactly when that happened, but
Yeah,
definitely as I went through this was my final project for my certificate of creative writing. So it was, read by Marina Nemeth, who's the author of Prisoner of Tehran, and she was a memoir teacher for me, instructor.
amazing.
And I had to sort of defend it almost like a thesis you would in your master's program. So I'd gone through all of these courses and revisions and revisions and revisions, and I got to this stage, and now there was so much interest in it. And I thought, oh, I think other people want to read this. And now my dad is, aging. And so now I'm thinking, okay, I think we need to self publish because I think we're going to run out of
The
time.
time frame, yeah.
Right. And so that's what we ended up doing is we self published. And then we had a new publisher here in town. And I thought, well, I'll just give it a try and I'll send it to them, see what happens. And they accepted it. So, like, it's not a really typical journey. I didn't query a ton of time, but it just things just fell into place, which I think the universe does conspire to help us when we put ourselves out there and decide to do things.
Book was ready. I
Yeah.
mean, Lisa, when people tell me that it's a needle in a haystack to query or to find an agent, to find a publisher, all these things, it's not been by experience in the thousands of writers that I've worked with. It happens more often than not, the way that you just described, which is something falls into place, right? Or
Yeah.
something happens. And when the book is ready, you get a completely different response,
Yeah.
right? Okay. So after this amazing experience, and then you went on to write a novel, and I'm going to ask for pronunciation help again, but Sisu's Winter War.
Yeah.
Did I say
Perfect.
it right?
Well
Oh,
done.
look at me. So I know that Sisu is a word that really means a lot to you. It's about grit and determination, and it's what you coach writers and women writers specifically about. Can you talk a little bit about what that concept is?
Yeah, I mean, it is probably the key word in my vocabulary. So I'm a Finnish Canadian. My dad obviously is from Finland. My mom is second generation Finnish. And Sisu is just this concept I've known about my whole life. And there's no real translation into English. So grit, determination, courage in the face of adversity, all of those things are circling around it. But imagine yourself in a situation where if that you had a challenge in front of you and there's no way it's going to work in your favor and you keep going anyway, right? That's Sisu. That's that really deep ability and drive to keep moving forward in the worst circumstances. So I've always been aware of this concept and I've drawn on it in my life at various times. I've seen how Finnish people, my family, face some really difficult times. And sometimes I call it Finnish stoicism, that kind of very blank face and not complaining about it, just moving, just getting the job done. And that's also Sisu. So sometimes we think of Sisu as being connected to like the Finnish Winter War with Russia, 1939, 1940, which is when my book is set. And for sure, but we also have sort of everyday Sisu, right? That kind of ability to use that inner determination to face life's everyday challenges. And there's ways to kind of make Sisu stronger in your day to day life by maybe going for a walk in nature, like you mentioned earlier. Like those are kinds of things that replenish us and make us able to face those challenges.
And so this concept, this Finnish concept of sisu is not inherently male or female. It could be either.
No, it's either.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
100%.
yeah, I would liken it to, and I wish that we did have vocabulary around that because this conversation reminds me a lot about talking with writers about agency, right?
Yes.
What is that deeply personal reason why your characters in your book are going to go above and beyond to get their goal beyond what a normal human being would do.
Mhm.
Why are they doing it? What
Yeah.
is that thing? And that is such a difficult concept to talk with writers about because they think that their characters are doing it sometimes and they're not. And without that, we don't have a novel.
Right.
Does that,
Exactly.
like, can you see that parallel?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, for sure. I think that idea of agency and the characters making decisions, and there's repercussions to those decisions, whether it's positive or negative, and that leads to the next thing, right? That the character is making choices and they're not just reacting to what's happening to them,
Mhm.
and that like you say, that determination, that courage to continue forward when, really would we like in real life, would we be like, no, not doing that? But our characters are like, have to, right? They're driven to. And so I totally see there's a connection there with this concept of sisu for
Yeah. And
sure.
talking with writers about putting that into practice in their own lives. I love that. It's so meta, right? Like
Yeah.
we've
Right.
got to do it in our books, so we got to do it for ourselves. The
Yeah.
one thing that I find I get pushback from writers when they say, well, I'm introverted and therefore I'm not going to be the one, the gregarious person out there making all these decisions and commanding the room. And that isn't what it's about, right? Like, I
No.
mean, I live with introverts and I can tell you that they have strong opinions and make decisions. They may
Yes.
not tell you what they are, but they're gonna do
Yes.
what they want.
100%. And
Um,
Susie, I have to say that my whole like I'm an introvert, and I know people are always telling me, "No, you're not." 100% an introvert. My husband is, my kids are. We really like, yes, can we function in the world and have conversations and do all the things? Sure, of course we can. But then when we come home, we need that quiet space to recharge. I am drained after, a gathering or a talk or a presentation. I love it. I think it's great. I love to do it, but then I need to really recharge by being quiet and just we sometimes if you come to our house, we're all in different spaces and the house is silent. You don't even know where anyone is because we all just need that moment of okay. So introverts, yeah, it is totally possible to go and do all those things, right? All the, you publish your book and you need to go and promote it and. You can find joy in that. And there's ways to do that feel comfortable and good for you, but you just also need to know that you have to recharge your batteries to be able to continue.
Absolutely. And I think finding, like you said, those things that bring you joy. I mean, people tell me I'm the only, the most extreme extroverted author that they've ever met. And I've actually been challenged on it. I know Brandon Mull, amazing writer, had breakfast with once and he's like, I've been watching you at this conference. I don't know what's going on. Like, I want to know why you're a writer and like challenged me to my core. He's like, I don't mean to be rude, but like I'm a
That's so
writer because
funny.
I'm introverted and I need to express it. And I was
Yeah.
like, I don't know. And then the next day I thought about it. What do you
Mhm.
think? Extroverts can think too, right?
Yeah.
Introvert. And I went back to him and I had an answer, and that was okay. Well, yeah, I get it that this is challenging, but I said, I have learned over the years that nobody can handle all the things that I want to say. And so I have to put them somewhere and I put it into
Yes.
my writing.
Yeah. And I mean,
It's the opposite, right?
yeah. And I totally think that I mean, it is a little bit stereotypical to think that writers are all introverts. It's not really true, but I do think a lot of writers are, and actually a lot of actors are also introverted. It's a way of expressing themselves in sort of in a kind of
Mm.
socially acceptable way. But I don't think that's true about all artists. They're not all introverted, and it's just kind of an image we have of people. But
Mhm.
yeah, no, I think we all have something to say. We all want to convey it. It's just what means do we do? Do we create art? Do we write music? What do we do? There's lots of avenues for that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And writing is always personal and it is a means to describe it. So you've done
Mhm.
both. You've got sort of a novel out there and a memoir out there. If you are wanting to, this is something that I talk with writers about a lot. Would you recommend writing a memoir or fictionalizing their story? And in what circumstances would you do
Yeah.
one or the other?
Yeah. I'm actually working with a writer right now who's at that really early stage of deciding, is this story going to be a memoir or is this story going to be fictionalized? And I don't think there's a right answer to that. It's really a personal choice. So I think if you're writing memoir, you have to be willing to when if you're writing about other, family members or other people in your life, you have to accept what their reactions to it are going to be. So it might be that, I know one strategy is to send the chapter or section that, somebody has mentioned in and seek their feedback, but you have to make the decision whether you keep it or don't. And you have to also accept the fact that that person, you might be ruining a relationship, and that's a possibility. So memoir has lots of benefits and there's lots of reasons to do it, but also you have to weigh the risks and you have to make decisions like how much are you going to tell? You get to control the narrative. You don't have to tell everything. So there's a lot of decisions to be made up front about memoir, whereas fiction, you can take your experiences and you can play and change all the things, and it can be deeply personal for you, but for the reader it's completely fiction. And so there's a lot of freedom there. So I don't think one over the other is better. It's just comfort level of the writer and what are they trying to convey through these stories. And you can convey the same point through both, but for some people there's a deep need to write that first person story. This is what happened to me, and so do it.
And I mean, if you're writing on a topic, either way, that can lead to being a speaker, and you can share your own stories. Even if you
Yes.
fictionalize, you can share your own stories later
Yes,
about what happened with your life and how that
that's right.
affected you, and you can still find that community after the fact. I mean, in
Sure.
today's market,
Yes.
fictionalizing it is easier to sell.
Yes.
If you're not a celebrity writing a
Yeah.
memoir, fictionalizing
Really,
it is easier to sell.
yeah, really difficult to get publishers interested in just an everyday story of your life, even if it's interesting or has, significant moments that people can learn from. You have the option of self-publishing. There's hybrid publishing. There's other ways to get your work out there. Those have a whole other list of things that you have to do and be responsible for. So there's a lot of choices to be made. But like you say, if you fictionalize it, if and your goal is to have a publication like traditionally published, that might be the way to go if your goal is to sell your book. So thinking about your goals up front is important, because I mean, here I am saying, well, I just wanted to photocopy it and go to Staples, but but,
Hey, I called you out on it.
but I
That's
know
not what you
now.
really wanted. But those are the stories that we tell ourselves and make ourselves a
Yeah,
little bit smaller, and it's a
yeah.
protection mechanism, right?
I think it
Um,
is, but it's also maybe at the beginning, especially if you're a new writer, not really understanding the business, the process, the opportunities. Like I think if I was doing it now, I would approach it completely differently. But at the time, my focus was, how do I write this book? Like that was all I worried about,
how would
and
you approach it
everything was
differently? I want to
secondary.
hear this, and I'm sure our listeners are like,
Yeah,
"How? How would you approach it
100%.
differently? Let us learn."
Yeah, so now, I mean, the process would have probably been the same. I probably still would have met with my dad on a weekly basis. I probably still would have gone through that, long process of gathering the information. That, the research part was fine. But I think I would have been much more aware of the fact that I do have options for publication. I would have been more preparing myself in terms of thinking about, how do I market this book much earlier in advance. Like, I mean, there was barely any marketing when I self-published, because it really wasn't about that. Like and surprisingly, it sold really well, Finnish community especially. But now I think it has a bigger market. There's lots of people who want to read this and have read it. So yeah, I think I would have been just the business side of it. I would have spent more time understanding it. And that's probably wise for new writers. We want to write a good book. We want to learn craft. It's tough. It's long process, but there's the other end of it that will serve you well if you start that research now and understanding how those things work and leaning on people who have done it before, who can give you advice. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think now I now I would do it differently, but
Well, I
anyway, live and
think,
learn.
yeah, the time, whether you're thinking about writing a book or you're started writing a book or you're in the end stages of writing a book, the time to start thinking about who you're going to liaise with and what community might be interested in it and getting your hooks in and figuring that piece out now. The time is now,
Yeah,
building
agreed.
your platform and making those connections. Because if you've got 12 people waiting for your book, when it's done, that's better than zero.
That's
And
right. And those
yeah,
12 people have friends. And
exactly.
social and
And
like social media, I often have authors ask me, well, when should I, get on social media? And now, well,
now,
yesterday, but now is good too. Like get on there now
yeah,
and just get your
now.
feet wet and start to feel comfortable and see what other people are doing. And just eventually, like at the beginning of social for people who aren't on social media, which is hard to believe there are still people who aren't on social media because
Or there's
people
becoming
all
more and
are.
more people who were and aren't again,
Yes,
right? Which is
exactly.
maybe a mental
Yeah.
health choice and a
Yes,
smart
that's
one
right.
or a political choice.
Yeah, exactly,
But yeah, it's
exactly.
hard,
And
right?
all the different forms of that. So, I mean, it's wise to kind of figure out what space you feel comfortable in and what you feel comfortable sharing and start doing that. And then when the book comes out, you have a little space of people who are ready for it and want it because it's yours. And you can have that conversation with them. It's lovely. Like I don't have bad experiences on social media, to be honest, because I'm surrounded by mostly lovely writers and book coaches and other literary folks.
I
I just
agree. And
don't
my
see that.
feed, I mean, yeah, and then what I see is just such a lovely, supportive community. And then when
Yeah.
I sort of step outside it, sometimes I'm like, what
Yeah.
is
Don't go
happening? Right.
outside. Stay inside.
Yeah. I love working in the arts. It's a great time to be working in the arts. All right. It gives you faith in humanity. Some questions that I ask all writers that come on this podcast take you to write that first book.
How long?
Hmm.
Ooh, okay. So I'm gonna say
From the time you decided to do it and your mom said you're doing this and you were like, okay,
well, I really
how
did
long?
I actually started to think about writing it when I was 14. So, and I
Okay.
started writing it when I was 40. So there's that.
Right.
And then there is
Been there.
yeah, and then I would say it took 3 years between
Yeah.
starting and finishing and self-publishing. And then another 2 years before it was re-edited and repackaged for the publisher. So, there's different timelines there, but it took 3 years, but that is relatively quick, but partially because that story was handed to me, right? Like
Right.
I was given the story. I need to figure out how to tell it. And I spent a lot of time working through that process and doing courses and getting support. I know people whose first book took 20 years. So, like,
Right.
there's a
Yeah, no,
range.
absolutely. Well, that's why I asked the question because I think that there's this myth out there that it's easy,
Yeah.
right? Or that it's fast. And I
Yeah.
think, my listeners in particular, the Show Don't Tell Writing podcast, we're all about sharing the truth
Yeah.
and peeling it back. And yeah, so thank you for being honest about that. Now you achieved the Holy Grail, which is self-publishing and then becoming discovered. And that is something that people come to me all the time and think is possible. And I tell them that it's not because it is so rare,
Rare.
right?
Mm.
It's not common. And in fact, many times when you have published it once yourself or independently published it, traditional publishers won't touch it. So what was it about yours that made you that exception to that rule?
Well, I think it was a perfect number of things that a lot of which was out of my control, right? So one is I think it is a compelling story. It is. And I say that not because I wrote it, but because his life experiences were extraordinary. So there's that, right? Secondly, it sold well, like really well for a self-published book, which is also unusual because self-published books unless you're in genre fiction and on Amazon and a bestseller, it's possible. But like this kind of category, maybe less so. So that was
Yeah,
good
like you
because when
need
I
to
went to the,
have a huge number, like 10 times what you think,
yes,
in order to, and you're not sharing numbers, so I won't put you on spot, but like you have to have a lot more than
yes,
you think.
yes,
And if
yeah,
it just does mediocre as an independently published book, you are not going to get picked up.
yeah.
Yeah.
And the other thing that, again, not under my control, but we had a small press here in Sudbury and I had pitched to them and then they closed. He retired. So I'm like, oh, that's too bad. Like the timing was bad. And I thought, okay, well, whatever. And then the new publisher was just opening their doors. And I thought, what does it hurt to send it to them? And so I did. And they had an immediate interest. They were a new publisher, a small publisher. They knew that, like we had discussed, how my book was doing. They knew it was doing well. They felt like it had legs. They felt like the story was important. And so those things, like, it was kind of by chance. Like if it had been 5 years later or 5 years before, I mean, this may not have happened, but the timing kind of just fell into place. And so that's kind of what happened. So I think we needed a number of things to be going on at that moment. One of what was the book was done and it was doing well. So that helped the publisher have confidence in it too. But like you say, that's not really typical. Like if you've self-published, a lot of presses won't even look at it because
Yeah.
it's out there already. So I kind of
Just full
got a little bit
caveat
lucky.
before we share the stories, but we also share that piece of it, right?
Yeah.
That it's don't
Yeah.
necessarily do as I do, do as I say,
No.
right? And I usually ask, and maybe we've just answered this, but what your first big break was in your publishing or in your writing journey.
Yeah.
Would you say that it was is getting that picked up, or was there something else that really just
I don't
took
know
off?
that I would call, I guess that would be sort of the big break, but I think one of the first things that I did was start sending out smaller pieces and getting those published. And what that does for you is give you a little bit of confidence and know that people like what you're doing and are willing to pay you not much and sometimes not at all, but they'll put your work in their publication. And I think that's important, especially when you're starting out, because you really don't know if anyone wants to read your words and are they interested in this story. So I think it wasn't necessarily a break, but I think it's something I needed so that when it came to publishing this in full form, I recognized that there were readers who actually wanted it. And so, that's probably it's probably important for folks not to just focus on I tend to focus just on my novels and spend so much time, and I always think I need to send out more work in other publications, and I'm not always the best about it, but it is an important thing to keep sending your work out and getting rejections. You're going to get rejections, but keep sending your work out. It's part of the process, and it's good.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. And you are now you're writing and you're also a book coach. You're an accredited book coach with Author Accelerator, which is where I am also certified. Can you tell us a little bit about your book coaching business and what
Yeah.
kinds of authors you or what kinds of writers you support?
Yeah.
What's
So
that
I
all about?
have group of coaching classes that focus on helping writers either at the beginning stages or to revise a manuscript where they get a little stuck and getting them thinking through the fundamentals again to move their project forward. I also work one on one with individuals. So I have kind of a variety of different genres right now, but typically historical fiction and women's fiction, young adults, I work a lot with, and memoir. I have some memoirists as well. And so I do have a lot of women, but I also have some male clients, and I'm love to have them. And I just find it's such an amazing job. Like I never knew about book coaching before I started, and I'm just thrilled to be able to help other writers navigate this process. And it's just amazing to see their stories develop and change and see them grow as writers and gain confidence and access that finished sisu that we all have. Even if you're not finished, we all have sisu. And it's just I can't even describe how I feel about it because having left teaching and I am a teacher at heart, to find work that I love so much, it's just a gift. It's just a gift.
Yeah, working with writers to tell their stories is definitely a calling, and I know that you and I share it. And yeah, it's an absolute the most amazing job on the planet, right? Where can we find you? Listeners are going to want to find you. Where can they find your podcast, your website, your services, all that stuff?
So the main places are my website is lisakovalabookcoach.com. And I'm also on Instagram, Liisa Kovala, and Facebook, and I'm on all the things. But also, Substack is where I have my newsletter, and you can access the podcast from there. Although it does go out to YouTube and it goes to Spotify and all the things. Liisa Kovala on Substack, that's probably where you'll be able to find all the bits and bobs in my
Awesome.
writing
And we'll
world.
drop all those in the show links.
Thank
Thank you
you.
so much for coming on today, talking
Oh,
with
my
us.
pleasure.
Listeners, go check out the podcast for sure. Women Writing with Liisa Kovala.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to Show Don't Tell Writing with me, Suzy Vidori. Help me continue to bring you the straight goods for that book you're writing or planning to write. Please consider subscribing to this podcast and leaving a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever else you're listening. Also visit suzyvidori.com/newsletter to hop on my weekly Inspired Writing newsletter list, where you'll stay inspired and be the first to know about upcoming training, events, and writing courses that happen in my community. If you're feeling brave, check the show notes and send us a page of your writing that isn't quite where you want it to be yet for our Show Don't Tell page review episodes. Remember, that book and your writing is going to open doors that you haven't even thought of yet, and I can't wait to help you make it the absolute best. If you're feeling called to write that book, keep going, and I'm going to be right here cheering you on. See you again next week.